Chapter 12. The Big Distraction. Taking the blame in San Antonio. The San Antonio Spurs went into the playoffs in 1995 with the wrong idea. Most of the guys on that team and the coach thought we could roll into the NBA Finals because we led the league with 62 wins during the regular season. But once you get to the playoffs, the regular season doesn't matter. Nobody cares how many games you won. You can't play the playoffs like you play the regular season. You need extra gear. You need to be able to take everything, family, friends, hangers-on, and remove them from the equation. You need to be able to play physical, kick-ass basketball and play it every night. That team never found the extra gear. That team didn't have the heart to do what the Pistons teams did when I was in Detroit. The team got a lesson in playoff basketball, and I got a lesson, another lesson, on what it's like to be sold out and left hanging alone, to take the blame for the whole team's failures. It started to fall apart in the Western Conference semifinals against the Lakers. In Game 3 of the series, which we lost, I came out of the game in the second half and took my shoes off on the sideline. This was no different than most other games. I didn't see a place for me to sit, so I sat down next to the press table that ran behind the baseline. So there I was, shoes off, towel over my head, kicking back, watching the game. Then during a timeout, I didn't get up. I didn't join the huddle. I sat where I was, watching. The television cameras caught me the whole time. They, just like they always do, so the whole world saw me sitting there, back against the press table with my shoes off. Bob Hill didn't like this. Greg Popovich didn't like this. I didn't play anymore in that game. Nothing was said to me. I guess it was just supposed to be understood I wasn't going back in. After we lost the game, we still led the series 2-1, and the Spurs decided to suspend me for Game 4. They said the suspension was for insubordination. Then, after we won that game, they decided I wasn't going to start Game 5. I understand that it didn't look good for me to be lying over there when the rest of the team was in the huddle. I understand that. But I also think they made way too much of it. They let themselves be so distracted by me that the team lost its focus. They couldn't just let me be myself for a while and deal with it another time. They had to make a big deal out of it right there because they wanted to make sure I knew who was boss. They treated me like a child again. I got out of line, so they had to sit on me. The players wanted to take a stand against me. Management wanted to take a stand against me. The whole organization wanted to send me a message to me. Some of the players, Doc Rivers is one guy I remember, said I was being immature and doing things to hurt the team. That's when I first realized I wasn't going to be back next year. Players started deciding I wasn't worth the trouble, that the team would be better off without me. The suspension was Popovich's decision, but I believe he had the approval of the coaches and players. They weren't going to say anything he didn't want to hear. If another player had done what I did, I wouldn't have given a rat's ass. So what if a guy didn't go into the huddle? Like I said before, there's so many guys in the huddle who aren't paying attention. What's the difference? I wasn't in the game. I wasn't going back into the game right away, so why did it matter? It's all appearances and images. I wasn't representing the Spurs the way they wanted to be represented. None of the players stood up for me. I lost a lot of respect for the guys on that team when that happened. They left me out there, hanging, to save themselves. They played it safe. They knew it wasn't good for the team to make me sit out, and they knew what I did wasn't the worst thing in the world. But they didn't have the guts to stand up and say something. This is the playoffs, and they were more worried about sitting on me than winning the games. I had a hard time understanding that. It all goes back to the same thing in this game, money. Whenever there's money on the line, everybody's hush-hush. If a guy has a contract on the line that year or the next year, he's not going to go against general manager in a situation like that. He's going to sit there with his mouth shut, trying to be Mr. Nice Guy, because he doesn't want to say something the boss doesn't want to hear. If you sell your soul, that's what happens. I'm not sure, but I think these were the same players who were coming up to me at the beginning of the Lakers series talking about what we'd done in Detroit and what we needed to do to win it all. They would come up to me before games and talk about championship basketball, asking me for tips on how to play certain players, what to look for from the referees, how to turn the intensity up. In the end, though, everybody looks out for themselves. A player who's near the end of his career isn't going to say anything because he knows he could be gone if the general manager doesn't like something he says. Who's going to stand up and say something? A guy who's up for a new contract isn't going to say anything. A guy who might be looking for a new contract from that general manager a year or two down the road isn't going to say anything. Sometimes it doesn't take much to piss off management, and nobody's going to put themselves on the line for somebody as unpopular as me. I didn't like the coaching in the playoffs. Simple as that. Bob Hill coached the conference semifinals and the finals like we were playing Minnesota in the middle of December. He was going with a 9 and 10 man rotation. You don't do that in the playoffs. You don't sit me out for long stretches when I'm the team's best rebounder, best defensive player, and the only guy standing there with 2 championship rings. It's ridiculous. You play 6 or 7 guys in the playoffs and make sure your stars are out there for 40 minutes a game. That's the only way you can win. With Phil Jackson, Michael Jordan can go 3 for 18 and still play more than 40 minutes. You can't give up on a guy because he starts out badly. It was real easy for them to take a stand against me after we'd won the first 2 games of the series at home. Everyone thought this was some bold move on their part, but I would have liked to see what they would have done if we hadn't been up 2-1 when they decided to suspend me. After we lost Game 3, we won 2 of the next 3 to advance to the Western Conference Finals against the Rockets. They won in Los Angeles without me. I admit that. I sat and they won. It worked out perfectly for the Spurs. They got another chance to show they were taming Dennis Rodman, and the team won the series. Perfect. The television cameras were on me the whole series in Los Angeles, and again against the Rockets. I was like this sideshow to the game, and they didn't want to miss anything on the court or off. It seemed like they had a camera just for me the whole postseason. I think that attention made the Spurs do what they did. I've been taking off my shoes on the bench for years. That wasn't anything new to anybody on that team. I did that in Detroit, and it was never an issue. I do it because I want to let them breathe, and I want to feel free when I'm not in the game. My feet get sore when I'm not playing, and taking my shoes off when I'm not in the game helps me feel more comfortable when I'm in the game. It's not like I'm taking my shoes off to shove them in somebody's face. There's a reason for it. But once everybody in the country saw me without my shoes on, the Spurs and probably the NBA decided something had to be done. They couldn't be seen as having lost control of one of their players. There's an image to protect, the image of the NBA man. After we beat the Lakers, we had 3 days to wait before playing the first game of the Western Conference Finals against the Rockets. The Rockets went 7 games to beat the Phoenix Suns, and the last game of the series was May 20th, 2 days after we finished off the Lakers. I wanted to go to Las Vegas during that time off, so I did. I went with my friend Dwight Manley and Mike Silver, a reporter from Sports Illustrated. This, of course, drove everyone on the Spurs crazy. They didn't know where I was, and they were worried that I just bailed out on the team. Jack Haley called me in Las Vegas and told me everyone was panicking. He told me I had to get back to San Antonio that Saturday night, May 20th, to attend a team dinner with everybody and their wives. Then Bob Hill called and told me I better be there or else. So that was my choice. Stay in Vegas and have fun or go back to San Antonio and sit around with everybody and their wives. What I really wanted to do was fly from Las Vegas to Phoenix for the 7th game of the Rockets Sun series. I wanted to just walk in and sit courtside to blow everybody's mind. They'd be thinking, what's with this guy? He's everywhere. I thought that would have been really cool, to show up there and see who we were going to play. That's the aura I want to throw out there. A guy who's everywhere. When somebody tells me their hair is going to fall out because it's been dyed so many times, I tell them when it all falls out, I'm going to get 2 eyeballs tattooed on the back of my head. Eyes in the back of my head. How perfect is that? I'm going to do it too. So everybody knows I'm always watching. Anyway, I went back for the team party. I listened to Jack Haley and Bob Hill, and I decided to come back. Jack was the only guy on the team I could talk to, and I think the Spurs used him to get to me. Everybody around the league, and all the fans, thought that Jack was like my babysitter. That's how he's always described, as either my babysitter or my translator. I let that go. If people want to believe that, fine. Jack knows he doesn't have to wake me up for every practice. He knows I care about the game and work hard to keep myself in shape to play. It got to the point in San Antonio where people didn't think I can get to a game or practice without Jack leading me by the hand. Jack and I are friends, and sometimes he advises me on what's best for me, but sometimes Jack talks too much like a coach. I tell him that too, all the time. I let Jack have all that. I don't argue with anybody about it. If it helps Jack, that's fine. What I didn't like was the way the Spurs used Jack. They used Jack to talk to me. Then they went behind Jack's back and started talking shit about him. They said Jack Haley ain't shit. He's only here because of Dennis. That isn't right. Treat the man right. They told him he was the middleman and the go-between, and they kissed his ass the whole time they were trying to get him to play that role. Then they backstabbed him. They listened to him and took his advice. Then they talked bad about him. Typical. After the second game of the Western Conference Finals against Houston, after we fell behind 2-0 with 2 losses at home, Avery Johnson stood up in the locker room in front of the whole team and most of the team's management and said, "We can't wait for David Robinson to take us because he ain't going to be there for us." David Robinson was there, sitting right in the middle of everyone. When Avery was finished, David was still sitting there. He sat there and took it. We lost that series in 6 games, and the Rockets went on to sweep the Orlando Magic in 4 games to win the title. I guess you could say, based on that, we were the second best team in the NBA. That's not good enough, though, because I think we could have and should have beaten the Rockets. I got blamed for losing that series, of course. Everyone says I sold out the Spurs, that I didn't play, that I was a major distraction. It's gotten to the point where the incidents in those 2 playoff series, Lakers and Rockets, have become the defining point in my career. I say there are 2 sides to that story. Where was David in the Houston series? He got eaten alive by Hakeem Olajuwon that whole series. They asked me to guard Olajuwon and I refused. Bob Hill came up to me and asked me if I would take Hakeem in the first half, and I said no. I would have taken him in the second half, but not the first. Any coach will tell you, don't put your best defensive player on the other team's best offensive player in the first half. You put it all on the line in the second half. That's how it worked with Chuck Daly in Detroit, and I know that's how Phil Jackson feels in Chicago. What you try to do is contain the guy in the first half and make sure your best defensive player doesn't get into foul trouble early. You've got to be physical with Hakeem, and I'm no good if I've got 3 or 4 fouls in the first half. Then every time I touch somebody, it's a foul. Against Los Angeles in the semifinals, I couldn't touch Eldon Campbell without being called for a foul, and Eldon Campbell doesn't get the breaks from the refs like Hakeem does. So if you want me to guard him in the second half, fine. David got into foul trouble against Hakeem just by falling down. David asked me for help, and I told him right to his fucking face, I'm not going down there. I was not going to help him. He didn't say anything to me because there was nothing he could say. Before those games, he looked so fucking scared in that locker room. He couldn't stop shaking. They asked me to double Hakeem Olajuwon, and I refused. The way the defense was drawn up, there was no way I was going to be able to get back down inside when my man was out at the top of the key or way out on the baseline. The defense didn't make sense, and I told Bob Hill this. He just looked at me and said, "This is the defense we're going to run." In practice every day, Coach Hill would say, "David, you think you could play Olajuwon straight up?" David would just shrug and say, "You can all come down and help me if you want." Never once did he say he could take him by himself. This guy was the MVP of the league, and they were paying him $8 million a year. He needed to step up and at least say he could do it by himself. He was supposed to be the one leading this team. They were paying David all this money, and never one time did he stand up and say, "Don't worry about it, I got him." Those guys screwed me over for 2 years, and then they came to me and asked me to bail their asses out. That's what it came down to. I did what I had to do. I got them to the Western Conference Finals. I got them there, and we should have gone further. In that series against Houston, I played hard. I'll say that to the day I die. I played. People say I played as an individual, that I wanted all the glory. If you believe that, you haven't been paying attention. You don't know me or my career. I helped that team, but they didn't listen to me until it was too late. We lost the first 2 games at home, even because the defense we were running was ridiculous. David was getting killed inside, and Robert Horry was killing us from the outside. Do you want to know who changed the defense for the next 2 games after we got to Houston? I did. I saw what we were doing was wrong, and I set out to change it. I finally got Bob Hill to see it my way, and it worked. David played Hakeem straight up. Hakeem got what he was going to get anyway, but we stopped everybody else. That's the whole key to stopping them. Give Hakeem what he wants and clamp down on everybody else. It's not that hard to figure out. We won those 2 games in Houston to tie the series at 2 games each. In the 4th game, we blew them out 103-81. They scored only 81 points against us because we were playing defense the right way. We were heading back to San Antonio for Game 5, tied at 2 games. Even though we started out the series so badly, we were going home having to win 2 out of 3, with 2 of them, Game 5 and Game 7, at home. It looked like we finally had our act together. So what happens when we go back home? Hill decided to go back to the defense we were running in the first 2 games. It was unbelievable. We went back to double teaming way outside and getting our ass kicked inside. Then we switched up and collapsed inside so they'd throw it to the shooter, Ori, and he killed us on 3-pointers. We made Ori a star in that series. The Rockets beat us 2 straight and went off to the finals. I was so pissed off. I couldn't believe it. After the Spurs traded me, Bob Hill described my season by saying Dennis did not ride with us on the team bus to the first practice of the year, and he wasn't with us after the last game of the playoffs. You take it from there. I wasn't with them after the last game because I didn't need to be with them. We lost Game 6 in Houston to end our season, and I went off on my own. I didn't need to sit there with them and have everybody slap each other on the back and pretend we did all we could. We had a good season, but we didn't do what we could have done. We let it slip away, and I didn't feel like pretending it was okay. I talked to Phil Jackson, and he told me the same thing. David would have to play Hakeem straight up in that situation. With the way Ori and Kenny Smith can shoot the ball outside, there was no other way. David would have to play him man-to-man straight up, no help. You can blame me. I don't really give a shit. But where was Sean Elliott? Did he ever stop Clyde Drexler? Was there one time when Sean stopped him? I say no. Clyde lit Sean up for 30 a night, every night. I don't blame Sean because there was only one guy on that team who could shut down Clyde, and that was me. One more time I asked the question, where was David? When he couldn't handle something, they asked me to help him. I'm not going to help him. Fuck that. Who's out there helping Sean Elliott? Nobody. So they want me to shut down Hakeem, and who's going to stop Clyde? Nobody. If you're the MVP of the league, you've got to stand up and do the job. The bottom line is, I didn't like the coaching. If they want me to take all the blame, fine. I'm man enough to take the blame. I did some things I shouldn't have done in the playoffs. I admit that. I'm big enough to admit that. But why can't they admit what they did? Where was David Robinson? Where was Sean Elliott? The only guy on that team who stood up like a man and played in that series against Houston was Avery Johnson. Bob Hill wasn't ready for the pressure of that kind of series. He didn't know how to handle it. If I'm the coach, I'm going to let David Robinson get his ass kicked. That's just what John Lucas used to do. It goes back to what we used to do in Detroit. We knew we couldn't stop Michael Jordan, so we let him get his 40 points and set out to stop everybody else. What the Spurs did against Houston was try to stop Olajuwon and everybody else. We were trying to do everything, and instead we did nothing. We left ourselves open inside and outside. Hakeem was incredible. By taking that team to its second straight championship, he moved up into that level of Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, and Larry Bird. He was doing whatever he wanted with Robinson. He'd started on the baseline and hit that fadeaway. Or he'd drive the lane, or he'd give a couple of head fakes, get David in the air, and drop in a little jump hook. He has so many moves, and he's so strong. That's it, that it's tough to figure out a way to play him. When we won 2 straight titles in Detroit, I think it was more of a team thing. Houston had a good team around Olajuwon, Clyde Drexler, and Robert Horry especially, but they got their shots because of him. Everything started with Hakeem and sort of fanned out to everybody else. With the Pistons, Isaiah was the star, but every guy on that team could have been called a role player. The Sports Illustrated article documenting my trip to Las Vegas in between the semifinals and finals, the one I talked about before, came out May 29th, right in the middle of our series with the Rockets. I had nothing to do with the timing of the article, but I got blamed for it anyway. I thought it was for way down the road, and then all of a sudden, boom, there I am on the cover wearing leather shorts and a dog collar. One of my birds was on my shoulder. So there I go, another big distraction. There's another controversy. The Spurs started getting all pissed off and said, there he goes again. He's in it for himself. I had nothing to do with when that article came out. It became this huge problem because it showed what I did with my time off the court. But that's nobody's business. They didn't realize that I could do those things. I could go to Vegas and still keep my mind straight about playing the games. I've been around enough to know how to handle that stuff. What I couldn't handle was those guys, especially Popovich, running around wondering what the hell I was doing with myself 24 hours a day. Several people in the organization came up to me and asked why I did that article. Why would you do that in the middle of the playoffs? That was their question, and they wouldn't listen to me when I told them I had nothing to do with it, with the timing. And besides, it had nothing to do with how I was going to perform on the basketball court. We were down 2-0, and they wanted to put it all on me. They sat there, like Avery Johnson, and trash-talked David, and then they turned around in public and put everything on my head. They wouldn't say a damn thing bad about David in public, because they're all friends. Avery said it to his face. He was man enough to do that, but if it was me Avery was talking about, it would have been all over the papers the next day. Instead, because it was David, they kept it under wraps. It never came out that Avery had stood up in that locker room and said David couldn't get the job done. They sat me out for part of Game 5 against Houston, a game we lost 111-90, and afterward I just couldn't take it anymore. I went into the locker room and went off on the coach and the organization. I was so pissed at the way everything was being handled and had been handled that I couldn't keep it in anymore. I told them what I thought of their coaching. It sucked. And their management. It sucked. And anything else I could think of. I went off on everybody. I went off on Bob Hill. I told him he was a loser. I told him he didn't know how to handle the playoff pressure. I said it was a crying shame that they could come out and say they wanted to win the series and then go out and pull the bonehead shit they pulled. That was so stupid. I still get mad thinking about it. When I went off, everybody on the team crowded around and tried to control me. When Avery did it, nobody did anything to him. He just spoke his piece and moved on. They couldn't let me do that. I should have been playing 40 minutes a game, every game. That was the only chance we had. Every coach in the league will tell you the same thing. You don't sit out a guy who's been in the playoffs all these years and knows how to handle every situation that comes up. To sit him down for 20 minutes is insane. Player rotation doesn't work in the playoffs. I went off on Hill about the huddle thing too. If you're a coach and David Robinson doesn't want to join the huddle, are you going to make a big deal out of it? If Michael Jordan wants to sit over there by himself when he's not in the game, are you going to do something to punish him? Everybody was trying to make a point, and it was the wrong time to be making points. They wanted to tell me I've got to be looking in Bob Hill's face every fucking second during a huddle. I hear what the man said. I knew the plays we were going to run. Even after I got to Chicago, I didn't look Phil Jackson in the face. I listened, but I wasn't staring into his eyes. But I guess I have to look into Bob Hill's face and say, "Oh yeah, Bob, that's what we should do?" No. I know exactly where the ball's going. It's going straight to David. Do I have to look in Bob Hill's eyes to figure that out? Like most coaches say, as long as you do your job, I don't care what else you do. Most of them don't want to hear, as Chuck Daly used to tell me, "Go play, Dennis." The biggest problem in San Antonio was Greg Popovich, the general manager. He wanted to be the coach and the general manager. He stood around and held Bob Hill's hand every day saying, "Okay, you've got to do this now. It's time for you to listen to me." If Hill didn't do it, Popovich would jump his ass, and so Hill wanted to turn around and jump somebody else's ass. Shit flows downhill, and it seemed I was always at the bottom. Other than the playoffs, I didn't have that much of a problem with Bob Hill. He was being used as much as I was. Popovich wanted to be the guy who tamed Dennis Rodman, and he tried to use the Hill to do his dirty work. That was Popovich's challenge. Mr. Military was going to make me a good little boy, a good soldier. He lost sight of everything else, and then when he decided he couldn't do anything with me, he badmouthed me and gave me away for next to nothing. Then he pretended it was good for the team. I understand that the Spurs didn't give me the contract I signed in Detroit before the 1990 season. Nobody made me sign it, and it turned out to be a bad deal for me. It wasn't the Spurs' fault the market went crazy and I was left out in the cold. But none of that matters, because the Spurs said they were going to give me $7 million a year, and they went back on their promise. I could have lived with it if they had never said anything about the contract, but they did. I went into the office and Popovich said, "We will take care of you." Then he went on to the papers and said he never said anything like that, and that he'd never heard of a new contract. Would you be pissed off if your bosses treated you like this? Of course you would. Everybody would. After I left, the Spurs took care of Sean Elliott and David Robinson. They tore up their contracts and renegotiated to make sure those two stayed with the team through their whole careers. So what I was asking for wasn't something they'd never heard of or thought of. I didn't want a contract that would keep me there my whole career. I know I'm not as young as those guys are. That's why I just wanted a 2-year deal that would make up for all I'd given back to the team and the NBA. That wasn't there for me, though. Everybody else can hold their tongue and hope for the best. I tell it the way I feel it, and I don't give a shit who gets pissed off. In San Antonio, it all came down to this. I got sold out by the players, the coaches, and the management. All up and down the organization, I got sold out. I was out there on an island, an easy target for everything. If something went wrong, they had an easy answer. Blame Dennis.